I don't see Ms. Grant yet on the attendee side. I'm going to send her a message just to confirm that she's got the right meeting ID.
Yeah, thank you. She said she got kicked off because she was on hold too long. So.
Hello.
Hey.
Hey,
you're here.
I'm sorry. Yeah, so I called in early, and apparently, if you're a caller that's been on hold for too long, they boot you because apparently they decide that you're not going to be let in. But so are we still waiting for one person to join us, or are we all set to go?
Kim Williams is not here yet. I texted her, but she hasn't responded yet. So we might just want to get started.
Yes, let's get started. I don't expect today's agenda to be very long. I just really wanted to check in and Kim Davis provide you some support from the other committees if we can around the equity policy. So we will call this meeting to order, I guess. I don't want to skip that part. But we had a really light agenda today, and I just appreciate you guys taking some time to check in. I wanted to start off with any updates that you all may have from your committee, or since this is the last conference of committees, any things that you think the full board needs to have an eye on or be aware of that's coming up from your committees as we close out the year. Kim, I know we'll dive deeper into your committee. Tony, do you have anything in particular?
Yeah, well, just what we've kind of become, because I think it's necessary, is where we're discussing basically just how things are going, trying to get updated on the learning plans. So we're doing monthly dashboard updates on participation. And then usually with that, we end up discussing what GRPS can do to help those that are kind of falling through the cracks, especially connecting to the community. So I would say that that's still become more of an update kind of thing, and an open discussion. I mean, it's been helpful for the committee members to discuss with the academic team, and I think that we have a better understanding. It's gotten a bit away from, that's I think what the Academic Achievement Committee meetings have been done in the past, prior to the last year or so, and we've tried to move it towards more of a body that gets work done. But of course, this work is so, we would probably just be getting in the way at this point. Other than we have discussed, the instructional council is doing its work and reporting to us. We have also been trying to keep up on what's happening with the academies. Of course, the academies, everything, so much of everything is on hold. But that is the work. We talked about evaluation systems. So much of the work that would usually happen separate from just updates isn't really happening because the updates are so vital and changing from month to month. I would say in terms of what the rest of the board could do, and this could perhaps be a topic with our, if we have a January retreat, or perhaps this committee can determine this, but I would say that with both the instructional council in general specifically, but the academic achievement committee in general, is that since we have a board that's not changing and there's no new people anymore, but we also have a new superintendent, I think it would be useful for us to kind of really define what the academic achievement committee does and what and the role of the instructional council as it relates to the board. The instructional council isn't really a group that answers to the board, but it has been communicating to the board. And I've come to see it as a really nice way to be in communication with teachers. And I think it's been a good process. So those are just the things I add, but basically just a commitment to what academic achievement is as a committee, and then also what the role of the instructional council is to the board.
No, I think that's helpful. I think what we'll find is that several committees need a bit of a conversation around definition, even for policy. So, we've been looking at policy, and I brought this up a few times where it's an ad hoc committee because it was just used as cleanup. But my personal opinion is that it's really vital, and so we need to look at what is the role of them moving forward. But especially if we're talking about this commitment to equity and diversity and inclusion, that work happens through policy. And so, what I hope to see, and what I think a lot of us hope to see, is that pain points are identified in these subcommittees, and it kind of bubbles up with referrals to the policy committee about policy that can help to address them. So that's a long spiel, but I think that there are several areas that we'll be able to look at and redefine the work of the committee. And I'm really excited to see who is the next president and who will get to do that work.
Well, and you're making it apparent it won't be you. So.
I want to spread the love around.
But with that said, I think that's why this is important, is that even though there's no board members changing, leadership of these committees and chair can change. And kind of the reason I'm bringing this up with academic achievement is I don't think that the role of the academic achievement committee should be defined by whoever the chair of the academic achievement committee is. And that's really the way it's been. So we create a new academic achievement chair. That person meets with the academic team, and it becomes that. And I'm not suggesting that anybody's done it badly, but it's certainly not the direction of the board. So with you not being in leadership, Christian, and I don't want to presume that I'm going to stay on as academic chair, but what would we do to implement that? And I guess we could direct policy committee.
I was just going to say, is that something that we could further develop the policy that Sharon didn't we just approve through policy that the policy committee and another committee are permanent now?
Yes, the policy and the legislative committee, the board just approved those as standing committees.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if in that area of policy, we could maybe expand upon defining the roles of those committees. I don't know.
I think that's appropriate. It's just that we would have to for this particular conversation to be meaningful, we have to designate this work getting done by January. Otherwise, we would have a new group of people deciding what the work should look like. So
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
and I
think
think-
that this committee can frame some language and present it to the full board.
okay.
And we've
Would it
talked
be-
about like what is that handbook where new people are coming in and they're getting like some real valuable information. And I think, you know, like when I was new, it was my approach was kind of like, put me on the committee that I don't want to be on because I'll learn the most because I'm like I'm out of my element and I'm paying attention. But there was really nothing to break down exactly what happens in the committee. So I kind of was just interviewing other board members about like, okay, what work do you do here? But we really should be able to provide like a definition of the work that each committee does and the role that board members play in that space.
My wonder is moving forward, if we continue with the conference of the committee chairs, then, or the meeting of the committee chairs, could that be something that maybe the committee chairs work on, is a handbook for school board members? And then maybe then it moves to policy, where what policy could we come up with that enforces the use of the handbook or something, you know? Maybe it's not a policy committee development thing.
I think that sounds good because you have people from each committee who are doing the work of the committees. And really when was it last year when this committee was brought back, it really was to try to provide some coordination between the committees. I was just thinking like we're all in silos doing separate work, but we should be in lockstep. And, you know, that has been thrown off a little bit by all the things that have happened. But the purpose of bringing this committee back was with the thought that we should all be on the same page about what's happening. And if it's meaningful, it should end in dialogue with the policy committee.
And it did, I mean, we obviously got cut short since we, because of COVID, but I think it did help. Like, I think that the administration does things differently. So the coordination of academic curriculum, for instance, and finance. So now that, now the administration is bringing new curriculum to the academic achievement committee before it brings it to the finance committee. And that change practices, I'm not sure it's written down anywhere, but I do know that we've had meetings now where we get a pretty good indication of why we're moving to a new curriculum.
Yes. Yes.
I'm wondering, I'm having a hard time picturing us getting this accomplished before the new year, but I'm wondering if we could at least in our next committee meetings have members be prepared to share some items that they would like to see as, you know, what would they like to see in writing that this committee is responsible for, and then get their input so it feels like a whole board pulling together. And then when we meet back together, we could have that information from this year. I mean, it might not be us, but when the first committee chair meeting comes together, they'd have the information from this year to start that work on a handbook. Does that make sense?
So I would say that I know it requires a little pushing, but I think that each committee chair this year could send in 4 or 5 key points that they think are really important work or should be some of the work of their committee, and that we can compile that and have that together instead of putting it off for next time, because next time everyone at the table could be different. Also, just a note, the conference of the committee chairs is not something that has to happen. As a president, I requested that it happen, but the next president may not request that, right? So of course, I mean, that's a conversation. I think it's very valid, and whoever that person is, I would definitely recommend it. But I just don't want to take that for granted. I think we all can find some time to write out 4 or 5 points and then go from there. At least
Yeah,
to
and then
be able
maybe
to
if need,
submit it to the next group.
yeah, maybe if need be, we'd pull back together before the new year then.
I think
But
that's
yeah, I
good.
think even if we all submit it together to like Julie or something and she can just compile it at the very least, I'm saying like at the lowest of levels, and then it can be shared with the next committee.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I think that that's the best. I think having, I mean, the chairs, you know, maybe Kim can work with Jen since she's done it before if she wants some help. But I think that really the chairs have this sense. I don't really want to open it up to a lot of input because it's just like, you know, we've been thinking about it for a long time. So let's just do it. I think that finance tend to be more, not a lot of flexibility for finance. We have to approve purchasing orders and budgets. Achievement committee, the role of the policy, and I guess legislative.
Yeah. So another point for finance, though, and you know, Kim can speak to this when she chooses. But for finance, I do feel like we can brainstorm more ways for the full board to be abreast of what's happening in finance, because you're either very plugged in or you're not, and it's something that is important. And the conversation, like how much information is shared in finance committee, strongly depends on, I mean, like anything else, strongly depends on who's on that committee and just what their interests are. So we know what questions Jose is going to ask, what questions Jen's going to ask, but if they're not there asking those questions, they may not be asked. So I think even just some guidelines of like the type of questions that you should, as a new board member coming in, what things should you be looking for? What things have flexibility, you know, when we're talking about vendor lists and things like that. We've had conversation around them, but I still don't really see traction or change. And so if we're going to carry on that equity conversation, it's like not just bringing up the conversation of diversifying the vendor list, but how often are we reviewing them and what reporting are we seeing back, and how much money have we spent as a district with diverse companies, and you know, just things like that sometimes it takes people like their third year to really get into it. But if we're proposing this kind of thinking in the beginning, it might be helpful.
That is a policy level thing. So yeah. So who would do that work for finance?
So is it a policy or is it a handbook item? Like a handbook item that is also integrated into that first retreat that new members would do?
I would say if anything stays permanent, it has to go into policy.
Right, true.
Otherwise, It's just our opinion. And I think that if anything that's in a handbook is also what the board has agreed to in terms of policy, then it's, I think it makes it less problematic, because a handbook is still, there's nothing legal about a handbook.
Right, you're right. I agree with that point.
But there could be, I don't know if this is true, but couldn't there be a policy that states that the Board of Education will adhere to the handbook whenever possible? You know what I mean?
I think
like,
the handbook should say the board will adhere to policy. Here's the reason why, is because I think a handbook, I mean, there have been attempts to do a handbook since I've been on the board. but they do become a perspective or opinion of whoever's writing it as to what should happen. So even like who you should talk to about being on the committees, or what's appropriate to do. Everything, I
So
think.
if we want those things to be something that are permanent, then like who you should talk to as far as who should be on committees, then you're saying we have to come up with a policy for each of those items. Correct?
I think it's hard for us to say permanently anywhere on how we should do that.
Right. I mean, policy can
Otherwise,
always
we're
be changed too.
imposing. Yeah, I just think that.
Right.
I think that a
I
handbook.
think it could start with SOPs though. Like we don't really have board systems. We really don't. Like I'm sure the district has systems for how the board works, and we operate in systems, but the board members ourselves, we follow other people's systems. We don't necessarily have systems set in place for how we govern ourselves, in my opinion. And so perhaps this becomes like a system that we can kind of see how it works, see what makes sense, see what, okay, like that sounded good in theory, but it's not good in application. And then realize what policy might make sense at that point.
I mean, that would be a good setup for policy committee if we start work on a handbook. Then policy committee can start developing new policies that make sure that handbook's being utilized, if that makes sense.
What are your thoughts, Tony?
Yeah, I think that's good. I think it'll be a lot of work to do a good handbook. I'm actually Googling handbooks right now. I think that we could perhaps find good handbook examples, which would mean that we wouldn't have to rewrite a whole thing. But I think that it's easy for us to set apparent rules that aren't really rules unless it's in a policy. So how do I decide who should be the next president? What am I supposed to do to determine that? Now we have a policy that says you submit something. I mean, how are we gonna do that? Well, I mean,
May I ask
Yeah.
a clarification question of the group? So, and I'm asking for my own learning. With respect to a handbook, wouldn't our current district policies be the technical handbook? Are we suggesting that we're doing something in addition to? And I just want to make sure that I'm following, I'm tracking correctly.
that's
Yeah, the
basically
district
what
handbook wouldn't necessarily cover the nuances that we're talking about for board members. But I think this is diving into a bigger conversation. So I'm with the mindset that instead of starting out saying like we're going to make a whole new handbook, that we say these are some areas where we see there aren't set procedures in place. Let's start to define what those procedures or those steps, protocols might look like. And then if a handbook grows organically, but a handbook is a huge undertaking and it usually takes a lot of work and then it sits on the shelf. So I'm not necessarily saying we dive full in, but I do think that there are key things. So when I say like a new person arrives, I mean, they just get something simple, not like a full, it may become robust later, but that just puts a lot of work like just the idea of that. There's a lot of work on administration and ourselves. I think we can just start addressing the smaller things that we're seeing now and let it organically grow. If it goes from that, maybe I don't want to oversimplify anything, but
we could pull the board policy section into a separate document that has an introductory thing, that because a lot of what we're talking about is in board policy. So I think that's why, and I'm somewhat against the idea of a handbook beyond very simple. Like, I'd like to be able to say to all new board members, take the MASB, School Board 101, read the policies, have a coffee with every board member, basic stuff that you did, Christian, stuff that Kim did. And I think that helps. But to say this is the way you should do things, I think it starts to get problematic.
okay. I can see both sides of that. So I'm looking at one of the items on the agenda, which is priorities for 2021. I think at least having this conversation. So we've said a couple of things that will go over into 2021. And I think that is what I had in mind when we were talking about priorities for next year. But perhaps at retreat time, making mention of this to the full board and seeing where they feel about it, because I do feel like this is an item, if you were honestly talking about like a handbook or something that doesn't sit with just this committee, but would be a full board item. I don't know, thoughts?
Yeah.
Yeah, my thinking is, and Sharon and I, well, maybe we can have a separate conversation, but we have a meeting next Wednesday for policy, and I'm wondering if I could just throw out there 2 questions. What systems or procedures as a board do you feel we don't have, concrete idea of how we do things, and just see what people come up with, and I'll make note of those things. And then the other question is, what is our role as a policy committee? I'm just going to make note of what they come up with, because I think that will give us a jump start on this work. And then Sharon, maybe we can pull any policy that is related to board just as reference.
Okay, all of the policy committee, the policy book is set up so that all of you all's policies are in the bylaws. So that whole section 101, is all the board stuff. So I don't know that we have to pull anything other than that. I mean, if you want, everybody can access that. I mean, there's about 25, 30 policies in there, all ranking of different kinds of things. And I guess I'm struggling a little bit because this sounds more like board work and not really staff work, because obviously we don't have anything to do with how the board actually runs its business. The board runs its business and tells us, the things that are applicable to the administration. So I'm sitting here trying to kind of figure out, what is it that you envision staff, and by staff I mean me, because I'm the only staff person for this committee, to do, or is there something else you want me to do in terms of those board policies? I'm struggling with this.
No.
Yeah, I think this has become a bigger conversation than it started out as. Perhaps in my mind, I think if we just back up a bit, we've addressed some pain points for our personal selves and just the procedure of things. And I think the main point, when I call it a pain point, is that as board members, we have never talked out an exact system for certain things. So I think the first step before we jump 10 steps ahead is to identify other questions that may have never really been answered for people. They just kind of made their own, like, this is how I am appointed to committees, or other people appoint. This is how I think I become president. Maybe because every time we're in a full board meeting or a retreat, someone brings up an issue that they've had, you know, even if it's in passing. Last time Kathy said, yeah, I just find out, you know, I just show up and find out. But that was her way of saying, I'm not sure, you know, if we're being completely honest, that was her way of saying, I know what I want to be next year, and I'm not sure how that happens. So I think it's just a portion of the next retreat where we have this conversation, and then we can see what's happening and how we address it. If it becomes a policy, if the best way to address 3 of those issues is a policy, that's how we can do it. If the best way to address another 2 is something different, then let's do that. I don't want to make this a big thing, because technically, Sharon, this is the board governing the board, but it could become, can you type this up? Can you do this? And that's what I'm trying to stop from happening.
Right. I would say, Kim, when you do this thing next week with the board and with the committee, I think it'll be interesting to see, then to reflect what's in the board bylaws and see if there's overlap. You could decide that the board bylaw on committee participation or committee choosing is inadequate, and that needs to be strengthened. But I'm thinking that almost every time something comes up, it's in the board bylaws. And Sharon, I would agree with you. There are times that the administration could say to the board, you can't do that according to your bylaws. And so, but Sharon would never say your handbook says you're supposed to do something, because the handbook has nothing to do with her job. So,
Right. Right.
So anyway.
Okay. No, that, putting it that way does make perfect sense. So there was one more thing that I want to be sure that we talk about, and that's where we stand with this equity policy. So we were unable to get the equity work into a work session before the end of the year, because, like you saw, last night's agenda was really full, and we have one more full agenda for next month, but it will be on the January agenda for the work session. And so we will learn about the equity audit. We'll review what was done at the last retreat and those statements that were created. But Kim, what other support do you need from the full board and possibly other committees to continue moving the policy piece forward?
Yeah, so moving out of the retreat, I felt very much like it was the opinion of most members of the board that this wasn't necessarily just policy committee work, that everybody on the board wanted more of a hand in this. And so we, as a policy committee, we could take what was done at our work session and run with it. But I don't want to overstep, if that makes any sense. I don't want it to become just the policy committee's work if that's not what we want as a full board.
I think that's a good point. I do think the full board and also our moderator for that session also, stated, which I think led, full board to saying, like, yeah, we would love to be involved in this work. And so, I mean, the January work session agenda is totally dedicated to equity, whether it's the equity audits that the full district did, reviewing things from the last not work session, but the last retreat. So if you would also like to create some space in that agenda to really continue to craft the language or review what the work that the full board did and the work that you all did, I think there's space on that agenda for that.
Karen had her
Yeah.
hand up.
Sorry, Tony. What did you say?
Sharon wanted to say something.
Oh,
Thank you. I did go back and review what was sent, and one of the challenges, I think, is that the board, the boards of 3 different groups put together what they thought the equity statement was, but the board hasn't come up with one equity statement. And as you remember, our facilitator says, and that helps kind of drive some of the other policy language. So I think it's
Right,
hard
and that's why
for-
I'm saying if on
Yeah.
that agenda, we can do that.
so I'm wondering if maybe the policy committee should hold back on that then.
If
Was-
yeah,
wasn't
if
the
you
moderator-
can wait till January, if you can
Yeah.
wait.
Wasn't the moderator sending us some summary documents?
She did.
Okay.
Mhm.
She did send some summary documents. I can certainly resend
Okay,
them
yeah,
if
sorry.
that helps. I want to make, yeah, I will do that. I just want to make sure that I'm clear. So then the December 14th work session will not be around equity work. We're going to move that to January. I just want to make sure I understood what I heard.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat that again? I'm sorry.
I said the December 14th work session will not be around equity policy work, or where do you all envision that work session going? Because I had on my calendar, December 14th, we were doing equity work, and that would include both policy and then also looking at kind of the equity enrollment information and some of those other audits that we have prepped for board review.
I will double check, but I'm pretty positive that in our last conversation, equity had to be moved to January. And I'll double check with the email thread that had Julie on it. But yeah, I think somewhere there were proposed 2 work sessions in 1 month, and my proposal instead was to move the equity agenda to January. So we can look at that and reconfirm with everyone, but there is one agenda that is dedicated to equity work. And what I'm saying is let's put this there as well.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, are there any other comments concerning that? Any objections to moving that onto the agenda as well?
Nope, no other comments.
No, I just am appreciative of the clarity because I think that will help at our next policy meeting for sure.
Okay, and I know I knew that was on your mind, so I wanted to discuss that today for sure so that you could, create your plans for the end of the year.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I don't have anything else. Do you guys have anything else for the good of the cause?
Yeah, just real quick, we are asking committee chairs to write something regarding the role of their committee, and that should be
Because
sent.
do you think 5 points is enough?
That's good.
Like out the work?
Sure. And that should be, somebody should communicate that to each of us and where it should
Yes,
go.
if I can send a follow-up if you guys would like, to make sure that Mrs. Williams gets it. And do you think requesting that by the end of the month is feasible?
By the end of November or December?
November? Yeah, because then I could still share it with this committee, share everyone's responses next month. Like before the year closes out, we could still see what everyone is saying.
Yeah, that's fair. If there's, it's going to take me an hour, and I'm going to do it the hour before it's due anyway, so, waiting till the end of December is just as, so.
I think that sounds fine.
Okay. I'm making a note to myself to send the email reminding everyone.
Okay.